It's good to see you again. Thanks for joining us. My name is Felicity Ezewuike. Our conversation today will explore how we can resolutely begin to address the inequality crisis in Africa, with specific focus on Western region. I'll tell you why. In the last 2 decades, the region has seen impressive economic growth, but the gains has gone to a tiny few. According to Oxfam, of the 5 major economic blocs in Africa, West Africa is trailing behind all the others in tackling inequality. Oxfam says citizens are living under governments that are only half as committed to reducing inequality as their counterparts in Eastern and Southern Africa. Also disturbing is data that the wealthiest 1% of West Africans own more than everyone else in the region combined. Now, in the first 17 months of the COVID-19 pandemic, the 3 richest men in West Africa saw their wealth increase by $6.4 billion. It is Oxfam's submission that the wealth of these 3 billionaires could lift 18 million people out of extreme poverty, and they would still be as rich as before the pandemic. The body further submits that a combination of budget costs, rising debt, and a slow recovery from the pandemic has brought inequalities on all fronts to crisis level in the region. Now, if we are to uphold the SDGs pledge to leave no one behind, how can we get West African governments to act more decisively towards reducing inequality? How can we significantly close the gap between the richest and the rest of the people? Is any real form of wealth redistribution even possible? To share learning and experience on the inequality crisis and, of course, the way forward, I am joined by Country Director, Oxfam International in Nigeria, Dr. Vincent Ahonsi. He is an accomplished development specialist and physician with significant experience that spans over 25 years in the areas of global health, development, humanitarian response, and research. Doctor, thank you very much for giving us your time.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Let's paint a picture of the connection between inequality and poverty, and why Africa, specifically the Western region, is rated the least in reducing inequality.
Thank you, Felicity. I think to put things in the right perspective, we need to know that when we talk inequality here, we're talking about the gap between the rich and the poor, the gap between the have and the have-nots. This gap is extensively too wide. It has gotten to a point where it's becoming dangerous for humanity, dangerous for the polity, it's becoming a security issue. And Oxfam thinks it is high time now we look at it. Now, just as a background, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Let's look at what are the prevailing circumstances we have. In sub-Saharan Africa today, 1 in 3 children under the age of 5 is stunted by chronic undernutrition, while 2 out of every 5 women of childbearing age, that is between 19 and 45. They are anemic due to poor diet. And the United Nations estimates that food prices in sub-Saharan Africa is 30 to 40% higher than the rest of the world. We're talking nutrition here. And in West Africa, the population is about 441 million estimated. Out of that, we say Nigeria is about 221 million, which is almost over 50%. And we have about 25 million Nigerians now that are at the risk of severe hunger in 2023. These are the problems, and we're still talking about nutrition and agriculture here. And our food system is broken. Take, for example, the Nigerian annual national budget allocation to agriculture sector in the year 2022. It is just abysmally 1.7%. This is what we are saying poverty is all about. And in Nigeria again, 133 million Nigerians are suffering from what is called multidimensional poverty. If you go to the health sector, 6 out of every 10 Nigerians lack access to quality primary healthcare services. And this is worsening disease outbreaks and is leading to much more out-of-pocket expenditure. Is it education we talk about here? In education, over 20 million children are out of school in Nigeria alone. That is more than the population of Senegal and Gambia put together. Now, if we go to the issue of debt, Nigeria currently has over 77 trillion naira in debts. And for the over 5 years, an average of 49% of Nigeria revenue is spent on debt servicing. And in 2020, before COVID came, it was estimated to be 29%, which was about $6 billion US. And in 2022 alone, 80.6% of Nigeria revenue was spent on debt servicing. Now, that is where we are now talking about taxation. What is the position of taxation? And like I said, Nigeria is a microcosm of West Africa because it's almost representing 50% of West African population.
Very true, very true. You're painting a very worrying picture of the reality in Nigeria and West Africa as a whole. Could you explain a little further, for those who might not really get it, how inequalities are exacerbating the rate at which people are going into poverty, or more people are leaving and are finding it difficult to leave poverty?
Thank you so much. In the last 2 years, the rate at which wealth is being created is extremely very high, because COVID-19 came and it became a windfall for the rich. As a matter of fact, for between the last 2 years, December 2019 to 2021, over 42 trillion US was created in new wealth. And out of that, take note, it was created on the people's misery, because COVID-19 was out there. You have to get the medicaments, you have to get the vaccines, you have to get the what we call personal protective equipment to prevent it. And the people responsible for producing all these are the rich and the super rich who own the conglomerates. So in a nutshell, a wealth of $42 trillion was created. Out of that, just 1% of the population at the top, they were able to corner $26 trillion US. That's about 63%. And the remaining 99% at the bottom of the pyramid only had to cope with just 16 trillion US. The richest billionaires, again, if we have to bring it home to Nigeria, the 3 richest men in Nigeria have more wealth than 83 million Nigerians as of today. And how does this affect the inequality? We do not really, we are not belabored to the fact that people are creating wealth if it is not negatively affecting the 99% at the bottom of the pyramid. The case in question is that we are now having extreme profiteering. People are now making extreme wealth at the benefit and at the expense of the majority. This is not right. And these corporate profits are now driving inflation. How do they make their money? They practically make their money from income or profits on assets, on investments, on real estate, on things like shares and all that.
In the course of this conversation, I'm hoping that in the course of this conversation, sorry to interrupt you, sir. I'm hoping that in the course of this conversation, we could look at some of the submission. You are a fan of taxing the rich to get them to contribute a little more so we can, provide social amenities. We'll try and get to that. But before we get there, let's look at inequalities are in different areas. From your experience and your years working across Africa, which areas of inequality do you think requires urgent attention if we are to make headway at all?
I think inequality, like you have rightly said, affects the facets of human endeavor. We have the gender inequality, we have the racial inequality, we have the geographic inequality, we have the educational inequality. But what we are particularly concerned here is the socio-economic and financial inequality. If we are able to take care of this, we will have taken care of a lot of things. We are talking about inequality in terms of access to wealth, access to resources, and the way in which people are extremely cornering and getting this money at the expense of the majority. And in Nigeria case, you will be surprised, just 0.003% of Nigerians, are able to have more wealth than 170 million Nigerians. That is extremely inappropriate. So what are we talking about here? And this, if we are making money and we are not affecting other people, the majority, negatively, it will have been better. Take notice that the top 1%, again, they actually pollute the environment twice as the 50% people at the bottom of the pyramid. A billionaire pollutes the environment with carbon emission through his investment and his activities or her activities by as much as 1 million times as a man on the street. And who bear the brunt of global climate change? It is not the millionaires. They are the ones who own the super jets. They are the ones that own the industries that are polluting the environment. But it is the poor people, the day-to-day human beings on the street that are now bearing the brunt of climate change. That is why we are saying they should pay more.
Okay. I want you to speak specifically on gender inequality. And if we have a little more time, I would also want you to talk about inequality between urban and rural areas, considering the disparity as to who brings in more, for lack of a better word, revenue. But let's start with gender inequality, because women are vital to the race to end poverty, aren't they?
Yeah, obviously they are. Quite unfortunately, West Africa is a geographical location, a geographical environment where we have cultures, norms and things like ways of doing things that are not favorable to women, unfortunately. Yeah, especially if you look at the way whether you look at it from the religious point of view or you look at it from cultural point of view, a lot of society and communities in West Africa still believe that the women gender is secondary or is second to the men gender. They don't believe in gender equality. That is not appropriate. We still have laws and customs that are militating against the upliftment of women. In some areas, we have women cannot even, access, even when they have the money, they cannot possess land. We have women that cannot inherit their husbands or their parents, wealth because of their gender. We have even our socio-political environment is completely not in support of the women gender, which is quite unfortunate. We are saying for the society to be able to prosper, for us to be able to reduce inequality, we have to bring in the women gender. We have to know that everything we do has to be gender sensitive. God created them men and women, and they need to be respected, to be on the table where the decisions are taken. That is the only way we can reduce inequality in not just West Africa, but in the world. But unfortunately, this happens more in developing and yet to be developed, nations, especially in Africa. So gender inequality is something that we need to look into. How do we, set up programs and policies that are gender sensitive, that will live to the upliftment of women, and women will not be put back and as if they are second-class citizens. That is not correct. That has to stop. And that is the only way to move forward. And going further beyond that, we now look at the economic inequality. Like I rightly said, we shouldn't lose sight of that. If the rich and famous and powerful in the society are making this extreme wealth, and they are paying their taxes to the Commonwealth, we will not be where we are today. One, they pay least. You'll be amazed that billionaires pay less tax than even the average man on the streets. That is just the truth. These are people who have the billions, they extraditing now. They take this money to tax havens. The money they make through the people. And it is easier for governments, especially in the West African countries, to tax the poor than to tax the rich. They do not have the political will. With saying that is not correct, you have to stop giving the wealthy, the powerful, the corporations tax waivers. They do not
your submission corroborates comments that inequality and poverty is not ordained. They are a product of political choices and public policy. That brings me to something that Oxfam has done, and that is the CRI Index, the commitment to reduce inequality. In making measurement of how governments are showing their commitment, there are three critical areas that is focused on. I want you to talk about why that is, in order for us to understand what Oxfam is doing and how it can help the move to bridge the gap.
Practically speaking, we should just not, the time will not permit us to go into the details on how these studies are done. But for our viewers, for the benefit of our viewers, you could just log in there and just Google it, commitment to reducing inequality index. More importantly, I think what we should be focusing on here is what are the elements that come out of these studies.
Okay.
The themes that came out of these studies are simple. One, what is the what we call the economic indices, the cost, like the cost of living, for example. We want to talk about the social protection effects. We want to talk about human capital development. These are the elements that form what we call a stable society, a healthy society.
There's actually a reason why I asked that question, because I'm trying to see how we can correlate that to the submission that stats is showing from Oxfam that 1% of West African Africans, rather, I said it at the opening of this conversation, own more than everyone else in the region. Their combined wealth of these just 3 billionaires, I think they're from Nigeria, could get 18 million people out of poverty, if I have the figures right. Is any real form, that was where I was going with the question, that was why I was asking you for the measurement, the CRI measurement that is used, because can this indicate for us maybe how we can redistribute wealth across West Africa? Is it even possible to talk about the redistribution of wealth? Because in the course of this conversation, you've talked a lot about how the rich are, getting richer off the backs of the poor people and not contributing a lot. So that's my question.
Thank you so much. You're quite right. In West, globally, you talk about the top 1%. Yeah, and even in West Africa, you talk about the top 1% being richer. But I'm telling you, in Nigeria, 0.003%. It's not even 1%. That is 6,355 Nigerians have more wealth than 117 million Nigerians. And just 3 Nigerians have more wealth than 83 million Nigerians. That is the truth. And now, we know that if we are able to tax this wealth, one, if we can have what we call solidarity tax or windfall tax, again, if you make it a one-off, and if you can make it as much as 60%, they are not going to die. They are not going to stop being rich. That is number one. Number two, if you introduce an annual wealth tax of just 2% of those who have more than $5 million US, 3% on those who have more than $50 million US, and those who have 5% on those who have more than $1 billion, you will be amazed that Nigeria will be making not less than $3.2 billion US annually on that. Then if you stop giving tax breaks, and you are going to save another up to 2.9 billion US dollars. So what will this money be used for? What we are saying is for you to be classified as being extremely poor, we are talking that you will live below $2.15 a day. Do the maths. Pull these monies that you are able to make into the Commonwealth and check the population of the country we're talking about, or the sub-region, so that we can actually take these people out of extreme poverty. It is common sense.
Beyond taxes, I know there would be other ways we can increase revenue and redistribute wealth. We'll get to that after this very short break. It is fact that there is no silver bullet to addressing inequalities. And Abdoulaye Madie, during his time as the UNDP's Assistant Administrator and Director of its Africa Bureau, suggested multiple responses are required. So we're already talking about taxes. What other responses are there? What will they look like? We'll find out from Dr. Ahonsi after we take this very short break. Don't go away. Thank you for staying with us. We still have Dr. Vincent Ahonsi with us, and we're talking about how we can redistribute wealth actually across West Africa and bridge the gap between the extremely wealthy and the poor. And one of the submissions he's given is taxing those that have a lot more. Let them pay their share of the taxes so we can redistribute social amenities. Doctor, I want to ask you, aside from taxes, what other options are there for us to explore in trying to reduce inequality?
Thank you, Felicity. Another way we can reduce inequality is one, let us try as much as possible to reduce corruption to the minimum in the polity. Corruption costs West African countries a lot of funds, lots and lots of it. These are monies you need for social good, these are money you need for common good, and as long as corruption is at the same level at which it is now, it will be difficult to reduce inequality. The other one is that the issue of conflicts. Again, conflict in West African, you could attribute, some people have, the school of thought has said that this has its roots in climate change. In fact, I mean, if you talk about the Lake Chad Basin region, for example, people are saying because there is no more water and forage for nomadic herders to feed their cattle. So now they are now moving downwards towards the Atlantic Ocean. And in that process, they encroach on farmlands, their cattle destroy farmlands, and that leads to herder and farmer conflicts. And that is like a cycle. And in that process also, you have the farmers unable to farm. Climate change is already affecting the vegetation of the region in terms of agricultural endeavors. But now we have crises along with that. So the combination of climate change and this crisis is going to make reduction of inequality in the sub-region a very difficult thing. We have to look for how we can really solve our problems the non-conflict way. Non-conflict resolution of disputes have to be advocated. It is not buying more guns. It's how do we rein in all these gun-trotting individuals.
And that's actually the core point of this conversation, the conversations rather that we have here on One Slot. The idea is to look for uniquely African solutions. You've highlighted a couple of things. We must reduce corruption, we have to address conflict, and then climate change is also something. But tilting towards the solution part of things now, in concrete terms, Like Nigeria, Brazil is one of the most unequal societies in the world. But Oxfam has noted that the country has been able to reduce inequality to some degree by taking millions out of poverty. According to Oxfam, it has demonstrated that proactive policy interventions can reduce distorted wealth accumulation and the resultant inequalities. So my question would be, what are some of these proactive policy interventions that worked for Brazil that could work for West Africa if we have the will?
Felicity, I will not really bring the same jacket that the Brazilians wear and bring it and try to wear it for West Africans or for Nigerians for that matter. But if I am in the position to provide solution to inequality, what do we do beyond what I have highlighted? One, we need to invest and invest and invest. This is not the time to go the austerity way. We have to invest proactively, like you have said, on social and human capital development endeavors. One, we have to invest in agriculture. Our agriculture has to be just, it has to be local, it has to be gender sensitive, and it has to be climate resilient. We cannot be allocating 1.7% of our annual budget for agriculture and expect a miracle. Two, we have to invest in education. A country that has 20 million out of school children is not planning for a better tomorrow. A country that the university lecturers can go on strike for as much as 7 or 8 months, keeping the children at home, is not planning for a better tomorrow. We have to invest in agriculture. How can we invest more in agriculture? This is the Japanese secret. This is the Chinese secret. Number three, we have to invest in healthcare. There's no other way to it. A healthy population is a wealthy population. We cannot continue to have as much as 6 to 8 Nigerians not having, 6 out of 10 Nigerians not having access to even quality primary healthcare delivery services. That is not the way to go. We need to invest in health. And of course, infrastructure, social protection. We have to invest in all this. This is the way we can take Nigerians out of this extreme poverty bracket. There's no other magic. Praying and fasting
will definitely not help us. I mean, all the areas you've highlighted, even more than I thought we'll cover in this conversation, you've been able to highlight a lot of areas that require intentional action if we need to address the situation. I'll ask you this question, and then we'll take a very short breather, and then we'll come back and continue. The rural economy, it is the backbone of most economies in the region. These communities have least access to all forms of public services, from education that you mentioned to health care. What I want you to establish for us before we go on the break is, how would improving public service impact the reduction effort that we're talking about?
There's something we need to really take cognizance of. The rural population we're talking about today are no longer rural. A lot of them have even migrated to the urban and suburban regions to become motorcycle riders, to become the guards, to become peasants. That is not the way to go. What made them to leave? They left because of insecurity. So for you to start talking about infrastructures and public social amenities that will keep the rural people to be connected to the urban, to be connected to the commonwealth and the socio-economic activities of the country, you first have to sort out the issue of insecurity. People have been driven away from their farms. People are being kidnapped on a daily basis. People, those who even have the courage to farm, to till the lands, to plant, they are not allowed to harvest them. They are being asked to pay exorbitant ransom for them to even go to the farm and harvest these products. So insecurity first, before we start talking about bridging that gap on how do we make roads as they are the road to the villages, the road to the rural areas accessible. Because you can make all the roads, you can do everything you want. With insecurity, we cannot get direct foreign investment. Nobody is willing to invest in an insecure environment. Nobody's going to stay in the village where in the middle of the night bandits come and they burn the whole houses and they kill as much as they can. So this is what should be on the table. This should be a national discourse. It is not just saying that we need somebody to construct a road from point A to point B. Insecurity has to be taken care of. People are no longer safe. They don't feel safe enough to even go to the farms, to even go to their daily, to their daily undertakings.
Yeah.
Then when we have finished with insecurity, yes, please.
You've highlighted quite a number of areas that we need to, address. What I was thinking we'll go on a break, but let's just stay on so we have more time to talk on explore your thoughts basically on the recommendations by Oxfam to reduce inequality. I'll take one of them. The suggestion is to allocate a minimum of 20% of government budgets to boost universal public quality education that is free of charge. So you've highlighted all the areas, you've even talked about education, but where I'm going with this question is for you to amplify what are the benefits and why must government act now if to get education to the people?
The benefit, or rather the advantage of getting your people educated or your populace educated cannot be overemphasized. It cannot. If you have an educated citizens, that will take care of insecurity, that will take care of the way they think, the way they reason, that will take care of things like what they need to do, what they don't need to do. Again, that will give them the opportunity to be able to not just have researches, to be able to have endeavors. We're not talking about the ICT time. These are no longer the time of, we shouldn't be talking about fossil fuel. How do we expand on our fossil fuel at this point in time? We are talking about how do we improve on our information, communication, and technology? How do we make the youths and the children to go to school and study STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, mathematics? This is what we should be talking about. And if we are able to commit our future generations to quality education, most of our problems will be taken care of.
Yeah, I know that's not your forte, but what would, off the top of your head, what would be a suggestion to governments? Let's stay with Nigeria, for instance, where you have strength, where you're focused on. What would be your recommendation to government on how to make education more accessible to the people?
One, the primary, incidentally, I happened to school in the southwest of the country during in the late 70s, early 80s, and all that. And if not for the benefit of free education introduced by the then United, is it UPN or United Party of Nigeria, I wouldn't have the opportunity of speaking to you today. I went to a public primary school, a public secondary school, a public university, all of them in Nigeria. That is why I have the opportunity to come to you and talk today. And it was qualitative. During our days, people were coming from other countries to school in the College of Nursing, University of Lagos. When I was in high school, people were coming from surrounding states to come and attend school in the Cameroon American Grammar School in Ondo State, now Ondo State. So now, how do we get to this point? We have abandoned the simple task of committing not just funds for making our education to be qualitative, for making our education to be structured, for making our education to be progressive. We have to commit more funds into education. There's no doubt about it.
So you're talking about, sorry to interject again. I'm really sorry. I'm trying to follow your thoughts and get the right answers out. If funding, you talk about funding, and one of the things I added to the question was allocating minimum 20% of government budget to education. As it stands, what is the amount that is, the percentage that is allocated to education, and what would you advocate that they do? I mean, they can't. They may say they might not be able to take the leap to 20%, but what percentage would show a commitment from government? Because that's one of the things that is being complained about in West Africa, that governments are not committed to the process of bridging the inequality gap. So for you, what would be a percentage that the government will commit to investing in education on the budget that will show commitment?
Thank you, Felicity. One, I do not work in the budget office, but I will tell you as a key stakeholder, I will be surprised if Nigeria has committed more than 7% in the last decade annually to education. I would be very, very surprised if Nigeria has committed that much into education. And another thing you need to know about budgeting in Nigeria, to budget an amount of your annual budget or to project an amount of your annual budget for a particular line item like education is one thing. To get the money released is a completely different ballgame. So we should be talking about allocation, not just budgeting. We've seen budgeting 7%, 5%. At the end of the day, just like we have in agriculture, same thing we have in health, and the allocation is very minimum. But if you ask me what should be the minimum yardstick, I see no reason why Nigeria cannot commit 15% of its annual budget released for education. There's no reason. Same thing with health. I see no reason why Nigeria should spend less than 10% of its annual budget on health. Why must we be spending so much on National Assembly? Why must we be spending so much? Yes, defense is quite okay, but if we had educated half of the militants, half of the bandits, so-called bandits we have today, if they have been educated when they were supposed to be, which we wouldn't be where we are now. This is my submission. Yeah, and I think for the future generation, for the future of Nigeria, we have to start now. Commit a minimum of 15% to education, a minimum of 15% to healthcare.
It's actually really tricky because however you look at it, there is not a dearth of ideas as to how we can bridge this gap. But at the end of the day, it's the will, like you said. Budgeting is different. Allocation and implementation are all different things. We'll continue to talk about it and push for it. But let's go a little bit further and look at regional bodies. Regional bodies, ECOWAS, for instance. Do they have a role here to play in, maybe applying a little pressure on government to take more decisive policy actions?
Well, you have said it. You said a little bit of pressure. You still remember, I think it was 2001 or thereabouts, African Union head of states gathered in Abuja, what they call the Abuja Declaration. And they came up with this idea that, we will allocate a minimum of 50% of our annual budgets to healthcare. That has never happened in Nigeria, to the best of my knowledge. And what can AU do about it? Next to nothing, unfortunately. So if you look at the regional body like ECOWAS, like AU, like you are trying to say, some of these countries are almost grounding economically or in fiscal terms. That is the truth. It's either there is they are overburdened with debts, or there is extensive corruption, and they don't even have, they can't even think of how to dig themselves out of the holes they have dug themselves into. So if you come and say, this country, why can't you commit this one? We are trying to put pressure on you. Who puts the pressure? I don't see ECOWAS putting pressure on Nigeria or Ghana and say you have to spend a minimum of this.
But what can they do? Because if they cannot do anything, then what are they there for? So they can't be there for the aesthetics, really. They have to contribute something to bridging the inequality gap. So let's say in an ideal scenario, what should ECOWAS be doing?
In an ideal scenario, you should be able to have not the regional blocks or the continental block or the what do you call it, whatever it is, coming in. They will be able to support technically. They will be able to advocate. They will be able to, provide the technical know-how or the technical ideas of how things can be done. But we are faced with, talk to any government official, they will tell you COVID brought all these problems. But we know these problems have always been there before COVID. Unfortunately, African leaders have not been very good in thinking. Many of them are much more interested in how do we spend, not how do we bake the cake. That is the unfortunate thing. And in that process, they are not able to innovatively think of how can we make things happen? What can we do? What can we produce? What can we manufacture? Some of them do. We know them. But a lot of them are only interested in how can we, is China ready to give us more money to spend? Or if China is not giving us, who do we go to next? They are so lazy. Like
the dependency syndrome. Lazy. The dependency syndrome that we keep talking about, we need to actually get out of it. Let's move a little further on in conversation. One of the suggestions from the Oxfam report to address gender inequality is the call for legislation to enforce equal pay for equal work for men and women, as well as to invest in skills and on-the-job training for women. You've expressed a lot of skepticism in the course of this conversation as to our will. But do you think it is possible to have improved legislation that will speak to the need for equal pay, and how do we accomplish it?
It's a legitimate call.
Okay, go ahead. I wasn't hearing you before.
Right. Equal pay for equal job is a legitimate call. And Oxfam, just like Oxfam supports that, I support it. But again, look at the context. I think this is not one of the problems we have currently in Africa or in the sub-region. Because in Africa, the moment your job is structured, whether it's a man occupying the position or a woman, you get paid the same rate, except if the job in question is not structured. It's already established. I will tell you that what is more important when you talk about gender equality in Africa is how can we have African women, Nigerian women to have the same rights that the men have in the society. The men have the right to visit hospitals without being accompanied by anyone, as long as they are adults. Then the women should have the same rights. The men have the right to say, oh, this is the number of children I want to have. The women should have the same. The men have the right to buy lands anywhere in the country or anywhere in the sub-region. The women should have the same. The men have the right to go to a police station and bail an accused person. The women should have the same rights. These are the issues we're talking about. And for example, if you can remember just recently, about 5 or 6 legislations concerning women and gender were brought to the National Assembly of Nigeria. And they were ashamed. I mean, I don't know how the real terminology I should use here. They were unfortunately thrown out by the patriarchal system that is operating in the country. That is unfortunate. That is appalling. That is not the way to go. We're talking about what. Yes, please.
Okay, quickly, because time is fast gone. I want to ask, there's been some comment, let me stay with Nigeria, that there's been some improvement in farmer implement, investment, and all of that. Because one of the calls by Oxfam is to increase support and implement policies to better help small-scale farmers by allocating at least, again, 10% of government budgets to support agriculture and develop agricultural investment plans that are gender sensitive. So from your experience in Nigeria, are the compliments accurate that government has done quite a bit in encouraging farmers to continue to grow our agricultural sector? Or you think that there is still some inequalities when it comes to how funds are distributed? How can we make it right?
When it comes to agriculture, again, the jury is out there. But if you ask me from my point of view, you cannot allocate 1.7, 1.8% of your annual budget to agriculture and say you have done well. I don't think so. And if you have to look at it, a lot of these farmers, especially in the rural areas, are mostly women. Many of them are women. I know some communities in Nigeria where the men just wake up and they look for the next beer parlor. And their wives are the ones that will go to the farms to till the land and come back and still feed the gentleman that is just left the beer parlor drunk. So Nigerian women are very active. They are ready to work and they know what they're doing. They need just the support. Unfortunately, they do not have access to farm inputs. To the best of my knowledge, they don't have enough. They do not have access to resources. They do not have access to banking or financial facilities to help their farming. And like I said earlier on, they do not even have the access to buy land for themselves. They have to go through somebody to get the land to farm. So that they go through their husbands or they have to go through their brothers or their neighbors. That is not the right thing to do. Give them the same access that you have given to the men. Let them be able to buy the land, produce the farm inputs, provide the farm inputs, and provide the enabling environment to them to be able to go to the farms.
All right, I want to finally, before we go, the director tells me we're out of time, so I wanted you to speak on this because I think it's important for you to highlight it. The index, the CRI Index for West Africa, shows clearly that governments have a choice and they can take steps to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor. And most of all you've said today has to do with leadership and the will to get things done. So I want you to highlight for us the consequences of the continued lackluster government approach and the outlook should commitment become visible.
Thank you so much. It is true that what we need is political will. Someone was writing on my Twitter page yesterday or the day before. He said, you want to tax the rich when the rich are the ones making the laws. How do you want to do it? So now the truth is that the legislator, at least the men they become legislators, the men, in the case of Nigeria, the men they enter into government houses, they are no longer poor. I don't know why that is the case. And in many instances, even the way they think seems to be different from that of you and I. So government still needs to do something. All of this, the box, these stops, are the government's table. And if the government does not do something about it now, because even to work on the streets may be too difficult for the too rich, because we want Nigerians to continue to be good, to continue to do what they are doing, but we should not wait until Nigerians start dropping dead on the street before we know there's a problem.
Indeed.
Millions of Nigerians don't know where their next meal is going to come from. That is the truth. Millions of Nigerians are hungry, they are sick, they are tired of promises. It does not take a lot to make a Nigerian to bring a Nigerian out of poverty. I've seen women through our programs. I've seen beneficiaries who you just assist with ordinary grinding machine. Before you come back a couple of months later, this woman has bought a freezer. She's now an employer of labor. She's able to hire somebody who is able to sell kankara, who is able to sell soft drinks with the freezer. Yeah. While she now grinds the pepper. What does it take to Nigerians are not asking for too much, for God's sake. We just need to be reasonable with them. We need to be compassionate with them, and we need to be helpful to them. This is what we think the government will do.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vincent Ahonsi, for speaking with us on One Slot.
Thank you for having me today.
Truth be told, as has been in the course of today's conversation, reducing extreme inequality in West Africa will be a challenge even when governments are committed to do so. I fully subscribe to Oxfam's submission that acting to roll back the economic divide in West Africa is an urgent priority, given the widespread poverty and insecurity, the fragility of democracies, and the poor access to essential services. Key takeaway for me today is that whatever a country's specific dynamics, there are a number of measures that have proven especially fruitful, in reducing inequalities across the region and can be adopted. From increasing productivity among small-scale farmers, Dr. Ahonsi actually ended with that, to ensuring women's access to land and strengthening capacities to keep the wealthy from evading taxes, introducing strong social protection programs that work, All of this can happen if the will is summoned. As always, I appreciate your time with us in one slot. Just stay tuned to News Central for everything Africa. Thanks again for your time. I'll see you next time.